Hey everybody, welcome back to another YouTube video where I'm just going to be narrating 5 disturbing, creepy, paranormal, or just spine-chilling stories that I found on Reddit. Don't forget to like the video if you do enjoy this type of content, and please don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. So let's get into volume 3. Creep on plane. I was on a plane once and noticed that, although people were still boarding, there was a large number of seats around me unoccupied. The last people on, though, were all together and consisted of one large family travelling together. There were 4 adults and about 10 children, ranging from toddler age to high school/young adult. They had the usual look of a large group travelling with children, some of whom were shy and withdrawn, others who were running around, and the adults looking frazzled, trying to keep everyone and everything together. When they'd all been seated, there seemed to be some issue with the seating, as one member of their party was supposed to sit several rows back. The flight attendant apologized and said that it happens, that sometimes their computer will shuffle sequential seating, etc., but assured them that there was seating available for everyone. The family sat down, -1, and started with the usual, "that's a shame" / "wish they could sit up here" talk. Since it seemed that their party was surrounding me, I stopped the flight attendant and asked her if I could switch seats with another passenger. This caught the attention of the large group, perhaps anticipating a complaint, but the flight attendant told me no, they don't usually do that, and that everyone has been seated, but asked if there was a problem with where I was sitting. I explained to her that I was traveling solo and did not care where I sat, and asked if I could give my seat to the member of the family who was absent, as my seat would have put them in the midst of their group. The family overheard and was thanking me as I retrieved my bag overhead and followed the flight attendant to the family member's seat. She explained what was happening, and I noticed that the family member, a young girl, maybe 12 years old, seemed in a hurry to get back to her family, and thanked me 4 times. She practically ran up the aisle, and before I could sit down, the man who'd been sitting next to her was literally staring with his mouth open and asked, "What's the problem?" "No, that girl was sitting here first," which was red flag number 1, and the flight attendant explained to him what was happening, and he immediately looked at me and said, "No, I don't want to sit next to him. Where's that girl going?" She explained to him that there was no issue and nothing she could do now. I think she was getting the same vibe. Now I want to assure everyone that I'm not in the habit of judging people by their appearance, but this guy was the definition of red flags. He was overweight and paunchy, that overweight with no muscle tone look some people have, half bald with a few strands combed over, thick glasses, and no chin. He was a mouth breather and kept his mouth open constantly, drooling on himself and sucking it back in between heavy breathing. If there were a textbook example of creep, it would be him. As I was putting my bag overhead, he started talking to himself under his breath about how this was BS, just my luck, wasn't bothering anybody, and why did they move that girl? I wanted to say something to him, but didn't. It wasn't long before my neighbor got a call and was talking about an upcoming court appearance, and I overheard "no victim's testimony" and "rarely show up," and people wouldn't ask me to babysit if I was like that. The only time I said almost anything to him was when he started blatantly watching porn on his laptop with earphones in, grunting, sweating, wheezing, and kept repeating "little bitch" when a part was on he evidently liked. Then took a blanket and covered his lap, his hands fidgeting underneath it. As soon as I saw he intended on keeping them there, I pretended to reach for the call button. Then he jerked his hands out and started muttering under his breath about me minding my own business. At some point, I got up to use the restroom, and when I returned he was on the phone again, and I caught something about "the ass on her." No, switched seats on me, got away, and he shut up as soon as he saw me approaching. The creep went to sleep eventually, and fortunately stayed asleep the rest of the flight. When we were all deboarding, a woman I presumed was the mother was standing with the girl and said, "Thank you again." I shuddered to think how he acted in the short time she was next to him, or how he would have had she remained there. Shocking absolutely no one, including himself, he was met at the gate by security and police. As he was being led away, he said, "This isn't my laptop, by the way." Strange knocking outside my window. This happened years ago, but it is one of those things you never forget. I grew up in a city that was southwest of Chicago. We lived on a small lake that was approximately 40 acres. It was a nice neighborhood where you would always find kids playing outside at all hours of the day and evening. My brother and I shared a room at the back of our house with a large window that looked into our covered porch and the lake beyond. We had one of those large wooded picnic tables that my parents kept under our covered porch. One night my brother and I woke up to the sound of a strange knocking noise coming from outside on our porch. It was a windy night and we attributed it to something behind our house that the wind was causing it to bang into the side of our house. The next day my brother and I looked outside to see if we could see what had been banging against the house. We had a canoe, lawn chairs, umbrellas, our sunfish sail, and the tiller and dagger board that were all there stored under the covered porch, along with the wooden picnic table. We tried to replicate the noise we had heard the night before with the items that were leaning up against our outer bedroom wall. We couldn't figure out what could be causing the knocking noise outside our window. We decided we weren't going to worry about it. It wasn't until about a week later when my brother and I were woken in the middle of the night again to the strange rhythmic knocking noise outside our bedroom window. We tried to muster up the courage to look outside the window to see if we could see anything that could be causing the knocking. I remember crawling up to the window and pulling open the curtain to see what was out there causing the strange knocking sound. I looked out the window and I saw two of the largest eyes I've ever seen. The eyes were glaring back at me and sent a cold chill through my spine. I remember crying out and running full speed to my parents' room to wake my dad so he could confront whoever was out there. My dad was a little mad for having been woken up in the middle of the night by his 10-year-old son because of strange noises outside his window. My dad went straight to the living room where the light switch was to the overhead light on the porch. He turned on the switch and to our surprise there was a huge barn owl standing on top of our picnic table. The owl looked a little confused and we figured out that it must have chased an animal onto our porch and crash-landed onto our picnic table. My brother and I were both relieved that the knocking noises we had been hearing was nothing more than an owl. It wasn't until about a week later we were woken again by the loud knocking outside our window in the middle of the night. My brother and I both bolted from my parents' room to wake my dad and let him know the owl was back. My dad heads right for the light switch, prepared to see the owl sitting atop our picnic table. To our surprise, there was no owl. The next day, my brother and I decided we were going to figure out once and for all what had been causing the loud knocking noise on our porch. We looked everywhere to see what could possibly be making the loud knock, 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 a pause, and then 3 more knocks, repeating itself over and over. It didn't sound like the noise an owl would make, or any animal for that matter. About the time we were about to give up looking, my dad comes around the side of the house with the look of anger in his eyes. He's holding an old hatchet in his hand and waving it around. He yells at both me and my brother, asking who left his hatchet lying in the grass along the side of our house. Both my brother and I claim innocence, because we knew better than leaving Dad's tools lying around, especially in our yard. Dad yells at us and reminds us that if he catches us leaving another one of his tools lying around, there will be some serious grounding. My brother and I knew he was serious, and using one of his tools without his permission, let alone leaving a tool laying in the yard, was a serious offense in our household. Neither of us had a need for using his old hatchets. The next day, we are all playing outside in the backyard with neighbor kids. We are playing a game of hide and seek. I decide I'm going to hide under our old picnic table on our porch. I crawl under the table and I'm looking around to see if I'm good and hidden. I look up under the table and suddenly get a bone-chilling feeling bolt through me. Underneath the old wooden table are hundreds of deep slash marks. I immediately recognize the marks as those left by a hatchet. Somebody had been under our picnic table with the hatchet, leaving the wood deeply scarred. To this day, my brother and I never figured out who could have been under the picnic table in the middle of the night with our dad's old hatchet. A picnic table that was just a few feet from where we lay our heads. My work is haunted. Saddens me, but I'm also curious. So I'm a caregiver at an assisted living facility. I won't say where for privacy reasons, but I started working here about 7 months ago. It is a beautiful building with wonderful residents. It never even occurred to me that this place may be haunted until I started working the NOC shift, which is the graveyard shift. So sadly in this type of work, the people you care for eventually pass away. I knew this would happen, but wasn't prepared for how often this would happen. We've had about 40 deaths, all from natural causes, since I started working at this facility. About 15 of these people were people that I took care of, people that I'd spent talking to, laughing with, and ended up truly caring about. So naturally, all this death kind of spiraled me into a depression. I made the choice to start working the NOC shift because I would have to interact with the residents less, but still be able to help. Now I know that seems selfish, but I had to for my own sanity. But this is when things get interesting. I was in a room helping a resident whose husband had passed away a week prior. She was sitting in a living room chair and I was standing next to the door. Now, the building I work in is built like a 3-story hotel, with doors fire rated for 2 hours with electric auto-locking locks which can only be opened from inside without a key. So it took me by surprise when the door flew open and hit me hard enough to stumble forward. Her response? I think my husband wants you to leave. So I did just that. Second occurrence was I was walking down a hallway on the 2nd floor when a thick white mist appeared right in front of me. Then there is the sounds of people walking in the hallways, doors opening and closing by themselves, voices, whispers, etc. But my scariest night was the nights I kept getting calls to residents' rooms complaining that someone was in their room scratching at their bedroom doors. Now we do get these kinds of calls every once in a while, but it's always chalked up to them being confused, and on a normal night I'll get 5 to 10 calls for help. That night I got 48 calls, all different residents, same story. Someone was in the apartment scratching at their bedroom door, but he left just before I got there. That night was terrifying. The Witch Children in the Woods. This is a personal story that happened to me a few years ago when I was 26. I've been too scared to talk about it until now out of fear of being made fun of. So here is my story. Call me Sarah. 4 years ago, my great-grandmother passed away at the age of 98. We were close all the way into my adult years, so the death hit me hard. She lived in a 1-story house in a rural town 30 minutes outside of Springfield, Missouri. Her house sat on a large and heavily forested piece of land. There was a large hill several hundred feet behind the house that dropped off into a creek. I spent almost my entire childhood staying on this piece of land and had learned how to take care of it and the house. After the funeral services, I volunteered to stay and take care of the land while my family decided on what to do with it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to buy the land, so I wanted to spend as much time out there as I could. My first 3 days I spent packing up items and cleaning the house. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, so I didn't have to worry about unwanted guests that would get in the way of my packing and disturb my personal way of mourning the loss of someone so close to me. The 4th day is when the odd events started occurring. I slept in a sleeping bag in the living room, and when I woke up, I immediately screamed. A few inches away from my face was a dead copperhead snake. It was normal for snakes and other small animals to get in the house, so seeing the snake wasn't surprising. It was the fact that it was so close to my face and it could have bitten me at any moment while I was sleeping. I briefly wondered why the snake had just come in the house and died because there were no physical signs that anything was wrong with it. So I threw it outside and continued with my day, and the weird event was almost forgotten. Later that evening, I decided to go for a walk through the woods to enjoy the nice weather and reminisce about the good times I had in the woods and all the games I used to play. I was walking along an old path that led to a well. The path was narrow and was close to the drop-off that led to the creek. I heard a branch snap behind me and instinctively turned my head. I didn't see anything, so I assumed it was an animal and continued walking. Just a few minutes later, I heard a snap to my left and turned to look again, but I still didn't see anything. I started to worry that I was being stalked by something, but it was rare to see large animals in this area, so I continued walking. I heard a third snap directly in front of me, but now instead of being worried, I was upset. I was convinced that someone else was out here trying to scare me, so I shouted at what I assumed to be a person, "Go away!" And everything went uncomfortably silent. But I started to hear footsteps approaching in front of me, but I couldn't see anything. They got faster and faster until whoever or whatever it was running right at me. I covered my face with my arms and waited to be attacked by some invisible person, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly lowered my arms, but instead of seeing a person, a bobcat, or even a bear, I saw a gigantic spider in the middle of a web I hadn't noticed before. If I would have taken one more step, I would have ended up being bitten. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the overgrowth and back to the house. I was spooked, but I was out in the middle of the woods and sometimes things like this happened. I knew this land and the house well, so I pushed through the night and the next 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I started yard work my second week staying out at the house and it wasn't bad. I'd actually found some old trinkets from my childhood that I'd buried under a tree. While I was picking up fallen branches from a storm the previous night, I noticed a clump of hair was caught in one of them. I remember its color being brown and black and considered the possibility of it being a rare encounter with a bear, but there were no tracks that I could see. I brushed it off again, but I was starting to think that maybe someone else was staying on the property, and that upset me. I decided to stay up late to see if I could catch the person in the act. Nothing happened until around 2 a.m. I remember everything so vividly because of how terrified I was. It started with branches crunching and the sound of the wheelbarrow I'd been using earlier falling over. I readied my flashlight and a small knife just in case whoever it was got violent. I heard them step onto the front porch and pull at the screen door, but they quickly abandoned it and instead started walking around the house. I could hear them scraping something sharp against the house, and I was furious. I stood up and shined my flashlight at the nearest window that I assumed the person was standing near and shouted at them, "I have a weapon! Get off this property now!" Everything stopped and I was positive that whoever it was had left, until I heard something slam against the window so hard I was surprised it didn't break. My flashlight shined on the person, and at first I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It had long dark hair with eyes that were way too big for its face. Its skin was wrinkled and reminded me of a naked mole rat. It pressed its face against the glass and fogged it up with its breath. I heard it run around the house several times and bang on every wall, window, and the door every time it passed them. This went on for hours and I was too scared to move or do anything. I was completely alone, being tormented by some strange monster. Every now and then I would get the courage to shine my flashlight and caught a glimpse of the thing. Each time I saw it, it looked more animal-like. All I could do was cry and wait for it to go away. Finally, just after sunrise, the running and banging stopped, but I didn't dare move until well after 9 a.m. It took all of my courage to open the front door and see what damage had been done to the house and the yard after the terrifying experience from the night before, but there was nothing. No footprints, no scratches against the house, or broken or cracked windows. It was almost like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew what I saw and experienced was real. Nothing else happened for the rest of the stay there, and by the end of the month, my grandfather came to pick me up and take care of the belongings I'd packed away. I was still terrified by what had happened, but I had almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it until my grandfather spoke to me. He told me that he was happy that this land was being sold, and how much he hated growing up here. When I asked him why, his answer seemed to validate my experience. Now, my grandfather is a serious no-nonsense man. He was the type of person that stayed quiet, but when he did speak, you'd better listen, because it was important. He was a hardened war veteran and devoted Christian, so things like paranormal and supernatural were just fairy tales to him. He made sure to tell his children and me, and the rest of my siblings and cousins that. He told me how his mother, my great-grandmother, would always try to scare him and his sister with stories about the land being guarded by monsters. The story says that these monsters, hybrids is what he called them, were the children of falsely accused witches. The people living in the area back when this was going on claimed that the children were part witch and part animal and needed to be killed, so they were left in the forest to die. He said that when the witch children died, they came back as spirits and claimed the woods as their own, and any unwelcome visitors would be tortured until they were literally scared to death, just how their falsely accused mothers had been scared when they had been killed. My grandfather said he didn't believe in much outside of his religion, but he believed that the hybrids were real, and that he had been tormented by one when he tried to go hunting in the woods for the first time and shot his first deer. He believed he had upset the hybrids by killing an innocent animal and never stepped foot on the land with a weapon, and they finally left him alone. Maybe this is a foolish thing to believe, but I believe that the story my grandfather told me is true, simply because we both had similar terrifying experiences. If I'd had a camera, I would have tried to take a picture of the creature, or if I could draw, I would post a picture of the drawing. I remember every detail about what I saw, and it will be burned into my memory forever. All of my childhood memories seem tainted now because of this experience, and now I don't think I'm going to miss the land as much as I first thought. It didn't take long for the land and the house to be sold. The hybrids, or whatever is out there, can be somebody else's nightmare. One night was more than enough for me. And those were the stories. You might have noticed that I included a fourth, much longer story to replace the fifth story, so let me know if you like this format and if you'd like me to do it every now and again. If you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, and if you enjoy the series, please don't forget to hit subscribe. If you'd like to share some of your own creepy, disturbing, or spine-chilling stories with me, please pop it in the comments down below. I would love to read them. I hope you have a great week.